A very good morning to all. On second day of EFDP ESTP on effective research proposal and manuscript writing. On second day we have four eminent speakers: Dr. Vinod Tiwari, Dr. Sandeep Pawar, Dr. Sanjula Baguta, Dr. Hitendra Mahajan. Now we will switch to the first session of Dr. Vinod Tiwari, Associate Professor, Indian Institute of Technology, BHU, Varanasi. Dr. Vinod Tiwari have completed his PhD in pharmacology from University Institute of Pharmaceutical Sciences, Punjab University, Chandigarh. He did his postdoctoral research on chronic pain and its neurobiology at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, Baltimore, Maryland, USA. His experience includes Nicholas Piramal Research Center, Mumbai, where he contributed immensely in the drug development projects related to pain, inflammation, and arthritis. He also worked as assistant professor of pharmacology and toxicology at National Institute of Pharmaceutical Education and Research, Ahmedabad. He is working in the field of pharmacology and neuroscience from past 17 years. He has 80 international publications in peer-reviewed journals, including in Nature Neuroscience, Proceedings of National Academy of Science, the Journal of Clinical Investigation, Neuron, Anesthesiology, etc. He has more than 4,000 citations and H-index of 35. Currently working on different collaborative projects with investigators from Johns Hopkins University, Russian Academy of Neuroscience, and with clinicians and pharmaceutical industries in India. His long-term vision is to establish strong pain research program in India. Today, he is going to talk on how to write winning grant proposal and effective manuscript. You are welcome, sir. The platform is yours.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. So, today I'm going to talk about how to write winning grant proposals and effective manuscripts. As an academician and researcher, this is, one of the most important domain where, most of us struggle in the initial, days of our career when we are a young faculty or when we are starting our, academic career in an institute. So I would be sharing some of my experiences from my postdoc as well while preparing my manuscripts for publication, and then my experience when I started my independent research career in Naipur, Ahmedabad, like writing grants, my failures and learning from those failures, and then how I moved ahead and were able to secure grants. So So before I proceed to my, actual, the main content of the presentation, I would like to pay my tribute to Mahamana Pandit Madan Mohan Malveji, who is the founder of this beautiful temple of learning where we are working today. So the pharmacy department where I'm working today is not only the first in India, but it is the first in whole Southeast Asia, and it was established by Mahamana Pandit Madan Mohan Malveji in the year 1932 when we were still under the rule of Britishers. So recently the institute has completed its 100 years in the year 2016, and government of India has launched this postage stamp in its honor. So I'm proud to be here. So okay, so before I have divided my presentation into two components. The first component, the first part, I'll be dealing with the publication, how to decide the journal, how the manuscript should be arranged, and different like components which are associated with the publication. The second part of my talk will be grant writing. So as rightly mentioned by Charles Darwin, a naturalist's life would be happy one if he had only to observe and never to write, right? So I always, when I talk to my student, I always tell them These days, it is very, very important, like when you do the science on the bench in the lab, you do your experiments. So when it comes to the writing your data, writing your manuscript, or writing the grants, it becomes equally important. So doing science on bench and then communicating your science, it becomes equally important. If you don't know how to communicate your data in terms of publications, in terms of oral presentation, in terms of paper or poster presentation, then you become less effective. So you really need to know how to communicate your science effectively. But that's a challenging part, and I would say it's an art, which everybody has to learn if you are in this field. So in science, no matter how spectacular the results are, how encouraging the results are, the work is not completed until the results are published. You need to make sure that you have an interesting data from your lab, from your project. You need to make sure that that data is published, okay. So planning your article, that is something which is very, very important when you are you know ready to publish. So the first question is, why to publish? Why it is important, why we are talking about this topic today? It is one of the most, I would say, important step embedded in the scientific research process, and it is also necessary for graduation. If you go to different institutes, universities in India or abroad as well, publication is one of the most important criteria which student has to met, especially when they are doing PhD. Some institute have criteria of publishing two paper. Recently UGC has also launched some guidelines, where they have ruled out this criteria. But still, this is one of the component which requires to demonstrate that you had done something significant during your PhD or master's work. And it is also important for your career progression. In many institutes, for example, if I talk about IIT where I'm sitting today, right, if you have to get the promotion from assistant to associate, you have to publish a specific number of papers in a particular frame of time. So this is not only important to get the degree, but also to get the progression in your career. Now, what to publish? So there are different kind of publications, depending upon what we want to communicate. So the first is research article, in which you have, done some wet lab experiments or some computational data, and you have some new and the original results of findings, or you might have established some new methodology. So that comes under the research article. The second type of publication is the review articles or the summaries of on a particular subject. So these are the articles which are mainly the compilation, of the recent information, published in the form of research article. Many times, the students or the young faculties, they do not understand, the novelty aspect of the review article. When it comes to research article, everybody knows that whatever you are doing in terms of new project, it has to be novel. The work has need not to be, it must not have been done by somebody else, right? But when we are talking about the review articles, very few people, they understand about the novelty of the review article. So when you are writing a review, you need to make sure that the similar kind of review must not have been published in the last 4 to 5 years. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to to write something which is already there out. Okay. And there are another kind of manuscripts that advance the knowledge and understanding in a certain scientific field. Now the another question is, why not to publish? So reports of no scientific interest, right? Like there are some data which are may not be useful, or you can say the data is not very positive, or when the data or is like of not relevance to the audience, and if there is duplication of the previously published work. In certain cases, when the conclusions are unacceptable or incorrect, so this kind of data, you have to be very careful that you're not supposed to publish it. So you need a good manuscript to present your contribution to the scientific community. That is the whole summary of why you need to publish. Now, questions to answer before you start writing a publication. So before you start penning down your findings in the form of paper, you need to ask yourself whether these findings are new, whether they are of interest to a large group of audience or to a specific audience. Is it a current hot topic? Have you provided solution to some difficult problems? So all these questions you are supposed to ask in the beginning when you are designing your project, and also at the time when you are penning down your publication. Are you ready to publish at this point? Do you have the enough data which can be compiled in a form of research or a review article? So if the answer to all these questions is yes, then you can go ahead and start preparing or working on your manuscript. Now again, you need to weigh down whether you are really ready to publish or not. As I mentioned earlier in my previous slide as well, you need to see whether your work is really original, novel. It can contribute significantly to the existing literature, or you have provided a up to date review of a subject or the field. On the other hand, if you think that your work is outdated and is of no clinical significance or no significance to the audience, and if the conclusions are incorrect, or is there in duplication, so you need to ask all these questions before you actually start working on a publication, and then decide whether you should go ahead or not. Okay. So now the next is what makes a strong manuscript. It's very, very important, to understand, when you are starting, writing a publication. So a strong manuscript is, very clear, concise, useful, and gives a very exciting message to the audience. It has to be presented and constructed in a logical manner, allowing readers to easily grasp the significance. It has to come into a flow. Basically, whenever you're writing a publication, it has to be like a movie, where the things are coming in a flow. There should not be any disconnect between the sentences. And when you're writing it, whenever audience is reading it, it should be presented in a manner that even a layman person can understand what you are trying to convey. Even if they're editors, reviewers, or the readers, all want to receive a well presented manuscript which are easy to understand. So it doesn't matter how difficult is the data, how complicated is the data. That requires a skill set or the art, I would say, how you are presenting it in a more simplified version, so that people can understand what you are trying to convey. Now, as I mentioned, there are different kind of articles which can be published. The full articles, or we also call them original articles. So these are the original piece of work with the data which has been collected in the lab. So new research findings that can be communicated in the form of research articles. Now there are letters, the letters to the editor. Sometime there are rapid communications or the short communications. So these are the quick and early communication on a significant and the original advances in a particular field, and they are generally much shorter than the full articles. So they can be just maybe around 1,000 words of or maybe 500 words only. So they are much shorter in word limit as compared to the research and the review article. Review article, as I mentioned, these are the articles which summarize the recent developments on the specific topic, and they highlight the important previously reported points. So this is not the place to introduce new information. And most of the time the review articles are invited in nature. So whenever you have acquired some, I would say, standing in a particular field, then the editors, they generally uh, invite you to give your opinion or to write a review article in that particular area. So these kind of public articles are known as the solicited or also the invited review articles. But there are journals which accept the unsolicited or uninvited review articles. In that case, you can write an email to the editor in chief, asking them that you have written some interesting piece of information in the form of review article, and then providing them with the abstract of your review work, and seeking their opinion whether this particular work is of significance to their journal or not. Then the editor in chief or the editors or associate editor, they will evaluate your work whether it can be suited to their journals or not. And based on that, they can, ask you to submit the full review article. Okay, so these are the different kind of publications. Now, before you submit your article, you need to self evaluate your work. You need to, weigh down whether it is sufficient for a full article, or still, there are some results, which are pending and needs to be done. Some experiments are remaining, right? So this is something which you need to weigh down, discuss with your supervisor, discuss with your peers, and then decide, whether you should go for publication right now or you should wait for some more time. Okay. Now, another important point is that you have to identify the right audience for your paper, right? So, what do you mean by finding the right audience? You need to identify the right journal. So, you need to see, what kind of work you are doing. For example, if I'm working in the field of neuroscience, so my job is to identify, what are those journals, which publish, important research findings in the field of neuroscience. And in neuroscience also, if you're working more specifically on some neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's, Alzheimer, or pain, you can dig out more specifically what are those journals. So this is how you filter down the journals which will be, which will be more interested in, publishing your work. Because if you submit your paper to the wrong journal, it will waste the time of the journal as well, and it will waste your time as well, and it will delay your publication. So you need to, weigh all these things, before submitting a paper. So this is what we were, just discussing, how to identify the best journal for a paper. So everybody want to publish in a journal which is reputed, having high standing in that particular area, having good impact factor. But sometimes, we may not have an idea, how to choose the right journal. So you need to see whether the journal is peer reviewed or not. You need to see whether they are Scopus indexed or not, right? You cannot go for the, predatory journal. These days publishing is a huge business, and the problem is that, sometimes unknowingly, we submit our findings to the journals, when they offer us certain, things like we will publish a paper in 1 week, 2 week, something like that. So you need to make sure that the journal in which you are submitting your findings are not predatory journal. Many journals are going open access these days, but some of them are, really good, like which are belong to the nature category or some other, journals. But there are certain journals which are predatory in nature. You need to figure out, which are those journals, and how to avoid, submitting your work in those journals. You also need to see who is the journal's audience, who are the readers. If your work is clinical in nature, you need to find out journals which are more clinical in nature. Like if I talk about the pain research, so there is a journal pain which is like one of the good journal in this area, and mostly, basic scientists and clinicians, they both uh, go through this journal. But if I talk about another journal which is very good, in the field of pain research, is anesthesiology. So that is a journal which is mostly referred by the clinician. So you need to see what kind of research findings you have in your hand. Accordingly, you can choose your journal. You also need to look at the average time to print the journal. Sometimes, there are few journals which are very slow. They will keep your, articles maybe, for, like for many, many months, and they don't respond at all. So you also need to make sure that your findings should be published in the, in a definite period of time. You can also look for the journal's impact factor, that also talk about the, the standing of that journal in the this scientific field. So decide on one journal. This is very, very important, and do not submit to the multiple journal at the same time, until unless you heard about the rejection of manuscript from one journal. You are not supposed to submit your paper in the other journal. This is, this comes under the, unethical practices. And if editors, come to know about this, that you have submitted your manuscript, in multiple journals, they can even, write to your organizations and can complain about this. So this comes under the unethical practices. So always submit your manuscript in only one journal at a time. and then wait for some time until you hear back from that regarding whether your paper has gone into review process, or if they are rejecting, not considering, then you can go to submit your paper in the another journal. Okay. Now, next is, you have certain tools, online tools, in the journal web page itself, which can help you to identify the right journal for your kind of work you have done. So if you go to the elsewhere web page, you have a option where you can copy paste the abstract of your manuscript, and based on your content of your abstract, this web page will suggest you a list of different journals on which you can go through and then decide, out of those 10, 15, or 20 journals, which journal is more relevant for your publication, for your manuscript. Now, what makes a good manuscript? This is very, very important. Many people, they do very good science. Their data is very strong, and the message is, very clear in terms of, good data, I would say. But they are not able to pen down it in a very clear manner, or you can say in a very, simplified manner. So your manuscript should be written very clearly. It should have minimal grammatical errors. Take the help from some expert who are expert in grammar, maybe within your lab, who is having a good writing skills, or take the professional. These days we have professional. You can help in revising your manuscript, making it free from grammatical or typographical errors. You also need to make sure that your message, the scientific message, should be very, very clear, and the flow of your manuscript is in a logical manner, so that when reader goes through your manuscript, they can follow what you are trying to tell them. Okay. So the formatting again is very, very important. How you have formatted your manuscript, how you have put down different headings, subheadings, is very important, and it should be written in a style that transmits the message clearly. That is the bottom line. Now, structuring your article. So, depending upon, again, whether it is a research manuscript or whether it is a review article, you need to understand what are the different heads. So, these kind of things are generally available on the journal web page where you want to submit your work. If you want to submit your work in neuroscience journal, for example, you can go to the web page of the neuroscience, and there you will find guide for authors, and every journal has their own customized and specific requirement, how you're supposed to align or organize your manuscript. For example, if I talk about the abstract of the manuscript, many journals, they ask for the unstructured abstract. So what do you mean by unstructured abstract? I mean, they are asking you to pen down your abstract in the form of a paragraph. So you should write down the rationale, methodology, finding, and then the outcome in just like one paragraph. But there are other journals, who prefer you to write down your abstract in a structured manner. Like they will ask you to break your abstract into introduction, and then methods, then results, and then conclusion. So these are known as the structured abstract. But before abstract, you are supposed to write down the title of your manuscript. Then keywords are also very, very important component of your manuscript that talks about the kind of work you have carried out. Then after keyword, you have to write down the introduction, then followed by methodology, result and discussion, and then followed by the conclusion, followed by acknowledgement, references, and supporting material. So we'll talk about all these, headings one by one. So if you talk about the title of the manuscript, it's very, very important. So the title should give a clear-cut message about what you have done in this particular work. So title has to be, very concise. Some people write down a title of like, 2 or 3 lines. So that is not appreciable at all. So the title has to be very clear, very concise. It should not be more than 1 or 1.5 line. Okay, it has to be accurate. It should be able to give the clear message to the audience. It should be unambiguous. It has to be very, very specific and complete. Okay, so some you can take the help professional language, and always avoid the abbreviations. Abbreviation are not included in the title. So it has to be very short, catchy, and are often better cited. Okay. For example, there are certain examples for you. Like, for example, the original titles, Somebody has written like action of antibiotics on bacteria. So this title is very short, but the message is not clear. So too short or too long titles are never appreciable. So we have modified it and we have written what we have written: inhibition of growth of Mycobacterium tuberculosis by streptomycin. So if you go through this title, you will get to know, okay, so in this study, the authors have studied the effect on Mycobacterium tuberculosis and they have used the streptomycin, and this is a clear cut message, which anybody will understand after going through the title of your manuscript. In the similar manner, if we talk about the third title, which is mentioned here, like fabrication of carbon, CDS, coaxial nanofiber, displaying optical and electrical property by electrospinning. So this is a very long title, and sometimes you lose the actual message which you want to convey to the audience. As I mentioned, title has to be concise, right? So you can convert it into like electrospinning of carbon, CDS, coaxial nanofiber with optical and electrical properties. So you need to understand, that it cannot be too short, it cannot be too long. Otherwise, the main message which you want to convey will be lost. Now, keywords are again, very, very important whenever you are writing your manuscript. So these are the labels of the manuscripts. Okay. And why they are important? So that when your manuscript is published, when it is online, most of the people who are working in that particular area, they search the articles by putting the keywords on the PubMed. So if the keywords of your manuscripts, are not matching with the work which you have published, in that case, your manuscript will never pop up, will never come on the PubMed, because you have chosen the wrong keywords. But generally, the editors or reviewers, they guide you in that aspect. If you're not using the right keyword, they will ask you to replace it with the right keywords. Sometimes, you have to, if you're using the right keywords, it has to be specific and should use only established abbreviations. You cannot use like too much abbreviation like DNA. Everybody knows it is deoxyribonucleic acid. So you have to be careful. You can use only established abbreviation in the keyword. Otherwise, use the elaborated form. Okay. Now, abstract is a very important component. As I mentioned, some of the journals, their requirement is the unstructured abstract, where you have to present in a form of paragraph the key findings. So as I mentioned, it has to be, brief as possible. Some journals, they only ask for 250 words, and you are trying to elaborate your work in the abstract, right? Which might go up to like 500 words. But this is an art you need to learn, how you are going to present the main crux of a study in as much little words as possible. So this is the art which you need to learn, and it has to be summarized in the form of like what is the problem, what is the background, what methodology you have used, what are the main findings of your study, and the main conclusion. Make sure that it is clearly written and easy to understand. Make sure it is accurate and specific and also looks catchy at the same time. Okay. And yeah, so while writing the abstract, we generally follow the rule of 10. So if it is a structured abstract or even if it is an unstructured abstract, always follow this rule of 10. So what is this rule of 10? So whenever you're writing the abstract, 1 to 2 sentences should be about the aim of your study. Next 2 to 3 sentences will talk about the materials and methods which you are using, which you have used in your work, right, in your experiments. And then next 2 to 3 sentences will talk about the main findings of your your work. And then the last 2 sentences will be talking about the discussion, conclusion, or the future outcome. Never go beyond these 10 sentences, otherwise it will make your abstract less interesting, and audience may not follow what you're trying to convey. So next is the introduction. Introduction is a again another important part of the manuscript. And many people when writing their manuscript, they don't understand how to write an effective introduction. Sometimes they get confused between the introduction and the discussion. The paragraphs or the sentences which are supposed to come in the discussion, they put it in the introduction. So you need to understand what should be the main component, which should be the part of the introductory section. So always remember, whenever you are writing the introduction for your manuscript, first you need to highlight the problem you have tried to address. For example, if you're working on pain, right, you need to talk about the what are the issues, what are the challenges, what is the prevalence, the global or maybe in your country, like what is this problem about. And then you should also talk about the limitations of the, if you're talking in the working in the field of drug development pharmacy, right, then you need to talk about the limitations of the existing therapy, like in terms of efficacy, if the drugs which are available in the clinic are not very efficacious, or the toxicities and side effects which are associated with the current therapeutics. So that part also you are supposed to highlight in the introductory section. That will make your introduction more interesting, and that will highlight the significance why you have carried out this study. So the introduction, you are trying to build the significance of the project you have carried out. And then in the later part of the introduction you can talk about your approach, or what you have done, or what is the novelty in your work, and why did you carry out this particular work, research project. Okay, so these are the three main components which should come in the introductory section, and this you can support with the help of existing literature as well. Now, next important part is the methodology. So, whatever techniques you have used in your project to carry out or to answer these questions, the questions which you have asked in your hypothesis or in your like introductory section, the questions which you have asked in the beginning of the project. So, what methodology you have asked, you have used to answer those questions, that should come in detail in the methodology section, along with the proper citation, maybe from your lab or from other labs who have used the similar methodology. You need to identify the equipment. You need to also mention the company from which you have procured that equipment, and also the materials like drugs, from where you have procured, what kind of drugs you have used, chemicals you have used, and the source of their procurement. All these information should come. You should also use the proper notations, like including chemical formulas, symbols, okay? And always, don't forget to present the controls. In the methodology section, if you're working on the animal studies, the grouping has to be very, very clear. What kind of, like if there are six groups, so what those groups have received in terms of, healthy control, disease control, or the treatment. So those things are supposed to be very, very, clear in the methodology section. Then comes the result part, which is, I would say, again, important, but what you have done, what you have obtained. So present your findings, explain your findings in the form of results. And the most interesting finding are the findings which are sometimes unexpected. So always tell your students, who are working on those projects, whatever data they are getting, they should not be biased with those findings. It is very, very important to understand. Most of the time, students, they are expecting the positive results, but the data, and they are hesitant to discuss with their supervisor. But the most important data, I would say, is the one which is least expected or the most unexpected. That always gives the new direction to the existing project, and something novel will come up from those findings only. So those findings supposed to be the main, should come in the main part of the manuscript. And you can have some more data which can which is not as important as the main data, so that can go as a supplementary file. And this data is important, but is of secondary importance, because journals, they have page limitation. If you have 20 figures, they cannot publish your 20 figures, because they have certain page limit, certain word limit, and they have to accommodate your data in that certain page and word limit. So they will ask you to only present your data in maybe 5 figures or 8 figures, depending upon the journal requirement, and rest of the figures can go into the supplementary file. So if somebody else is interested what experiment you have done, what are your findings, they can click on the experiment, this supplementary file. Always use the subheadings to keep the results of the same type together, and don't repeat the same kind of things again and again. If you have done some behavioral studies, so make sure that the same kind of behavior can be discussed under the same heading. Then you can talk about the biochemical results. So all the biochemical results can be discussed in the same subheading instead of giving it a separate heading. Otherwise, that will make your manuscript, more lengthy and less interesting. There are certain, you need to use figures, present your data in the form of figures and tables. It will give more clarity to your data, and the manuscript will look more efficient. Another important point is the statistical analysis. Always use the right statistical tool. If you don't have idea what kind of statistical analysis has to be applied in this particular data set, you can uh, talk with the experts. Then this is, again, the caption and the legend. This is something, which is very very important, and most of the time the students and even the supervisor, they ignore it. But the legend, the caption which comes, below the table or below the figure, is very very important. It has to be self-explanatory to enable the figure to stand alone. So what does it mean? If somebody is going through your manuscript or reading your data, right, so they should be able to understand, get the message, from the caption, from the legend itself. They don't have to go through the main results to understand what you have done in this particular experiment or this particular behavior. So it has to be self-explanatory in nature. You can use color only when they are necessary. When you highlight the different kind of groups, you can use the color. But certain journals, they don't accept the colored figures. So depending upon the requirement of journal, you can go to the guide to authors and then prepare your figures accordingly. Graphs have to be very very clear. Sometimes students, they group too many pictures together, too many graphs together, and make it highly crowded, and none of the pictures, none of the graph is very clear. So you need to understand that your graph should be very very clear, less crowded, very well structured. The labels on the x-axis and y-axis, their font size again is very very important. It should be a font size which is visible, which is clearly visible in the online and in the offline print as well. So this label size I'm talking about. The photos, the scale marker. If you're working on like taking some pictures from some instrument like imaging like SEM, or immunohistochemistry or histopathology, it is very very important that you mention the scale. Because scale will talk about how big is that particular that figure where you have taken this picture, and also talks about the uniformity of your data. So the scale is always supposed to be mentioned along with the figure. And also sometimes students, they try to enhance the quality of their image when it is western blot data or any other kind of image. But sometimes it is considered as manipulation of the image, and the manuscript can be easily retracted if somebody complains that this particular figure has been changed. So no need to enhance the quality of the image, and try to publish it just in the raw form as we are obtaining it from the instrument. So very little touch are required, otherwise if it is required, otherwise no, it is not permissible. Then you also need to present your figure sometime in the forms of table. So just need to figure out that this particular data has to be presented in the form of table or the figures. So that judgment you have to make depending upon how much data you have and how you can present it more effectively. Then discussion part is more about the interpretation of the result, what you have done, and what you have and this has to be discussed in light of the existing literature. And as I mentioned, it is the most important section of your manuscript. So you have to compare the published results with your own results, and how your results or findings are different from the results which are already published in that particular field, and how your data, how your results are adding novelty or adding sufficient knowledge, along the same line, or maybe different from the literature which is already published. So that will talk about the novelty of your work, like whether you have contributed really significantly in that particular field or not, in terms of novelty and in terms of building that field further. Always avoid the statements that go beyond what the results can support. So you don't have to be over ambitious in discussing your findings. Be moderate, and always present your findings like, that this particular, for example, this particular drug acts, somebody may say that drug acts, can treat the, patient suffering from Parkinson disease. So always use the words like may, because you have some data based on which you are, you know you are predicting something, right? But you are still not confirmed until that has to go through, further line of testing in the humans or other studies, right? So you can never claim something, you can never be over ambitious. So always present your findings in a more moderate manner that is more acceptable. Always avoid non-specific expression. You have to be specific, what you have, found and how you're presenting it. New terms not already defined or mentioned in a paper, they are also supposed to be avoided. Speculations on possible interpretation that are not rooted in facts, those are also supposed to be avoided. So always talk on facts, always talk on findings which you have from that particular, project or experiments. Now, conclusion again, in conclusion, you have to explain how your work has advances the present state of knowledge. Always make sure that you are not repeating the results or the abstract in the conclusion section. And you can suggest the future experiments also, and be clear to help the reviewers and editors judge your work and impact. So this is the, again, another important aspect of a publication. Acknowledgement section is very important, where you acknowledge the people who has contributed, so you need to understand, who will come in the authorship section and who will come in the acknowledgement section. This is a big issue these days. People don't understand, if somebody is providing you a help in terms of providing, some gift sample, that doesn't qualify for the authorship, that qualifies for the acknowledgement. Again, somebody might help you in proofreading your manuscript, that also comes under the acknowledgement section. Until and unless somebody has contributed substantially in your work in terms of, executing some part of the project or writing the manuscript, the person doesn't qualify for the authorship. That has to be included in the acknowledgement section. Okay, financial support, advisors, all these people comes under the acknowledgement section. References, this is the part where most of the people do the mistakes. So these days we have different softwares, or the, which help you to arrange the references. Again, different journals have different requirement. Some journal, they ask the last name along with, the year, in the text section. Some journal, they ask for the numbering kind of format. So depending upon the journal guideline, you can go for the use different, tools, I would say, to arrange your references. Then submitting your paper, that is also very, very important. You have to revise your paper maybe n number of times. You write the paper, submit, ask your colleagues, ask their help to read your manuscript, give to your supervisor. You might, receive it maybe 10 times, 15 times, to revise it. And once it has taken a, good shape, then you can go for the submission of your manuscript. Cover letter is a very, very important part of your, I would say, submission process when you are ready to submit your manuscript. So although cover letter, if you're not written a effective cover letter, maybe your manuscript may not be judged based on the cover letter, but definitely, it can help you to expedite the review process, or, so you have to very important what you're writing. So don't summarize your manuscript or repeat the abstract part in the cover letter. Okay. Conflict of interest. This is again very, very important. Every journal, asks you to write down the conflict of interest. You might have received some grants, some patent. You might have some patents. You might have received some honoraria or consultancy project, right? So it has to be disclosed in the manuscript, because you might have received some money from some company and they want you to publish that data, right? Just to support their, product in the market, right? So those kind of conflicts of interest or those kind of relations are supposed to be disclosed in the conflict of interest part, just to make sure that you are unbiased. Sometimes, career and intellectual, things like promotion, rivalry. So these things you can, write to the editor, when you're submitting your work, that your paper should not go to this particular person. So editor consider all those things. Then peer review and responding to the author, that is also again very very important. You can see here you are with your paper, and so many people are standing on your way, right? Reviewers, editors, before you actually achieve your goal, before your paper is accepted, so it takes a lot of hard work, I would say, a lot of efforts, to pass through this process. So when you are submitting a paper, first it will go to editor, and then editor will assign your paper to the reviewer, right? And then the editor will the reviewer will review and will give their comments. Then review editor will make a judgment based on the reviewer's comment, and then they will ask for the revision, or if the manuscript is substantially good, it can go for the acceptance, or it will be rejected based on the reviewers and the editor comments. So mainly reviewers, they look for the originality in your work, the clear progression in that particular field, and whether you have presented your finding in a more logical manner or not. So it is a balance between the novelty aspect and the technical quality of your manuscript. If both are balanced, then your manuscript can easily go through the review process. But if you are lacking, like for example, if you have high novelty but less technical quality, then it is a question mark whether it will be accepted or not. So there should be a balance between the novelty versus technical quality of your work. Then responding to the reviewer comment, again, it is very, very important how you are addressing to the reviewer's comment. You don't have to be very harsh. You don't have to be very straightforward. You have to be moderate while answering the reviewer's query. Okay. So these are some of the review assignments. I just put the picture, like what we receive from the reviewers, and then how we, because I'm working as an editor in many of the journals. So whenever I receive any manuscript, for editing or for reviewing, so I assign it to some reviewers, and then ask for their comment. So this is the job of the editor, to make sure that the received manuscript published in the definite period of time. So sometimes we have to keep on follow up with the reviewers as well when they don't submit the comments in the right time. So these are some of the review assignments which I have received from different journals. So these are some of the publications from our lab. So you can see that the title of the article is very brief. For example, activation of mu delta receptor heteromers inhibits neuropathic pain behavior in rodents. So it talks about the target which we have explored, like mu delta heterodimer, talks about the disease which we have pursued, neuropathic pain, and the study has been carried out in rodents. So the title is very clear, very concise. It doesn't go beyond like 1.5 or 2 lines. So these are some of the publications from our lab. So how much time do I have? So I have to cover the other aspect as well. The second part of the talk is on the grant writing. I think this is very very important, especially for the young faculties who are establishing their lab or who are struggling to get the grant. So why funding is important? We all know that to conduct the research, or to make sure that you have enough money to run your lab, you need to write the grants. So there are different funding agencies, governmental, non-government, private organizations, which fund your research if they feel that the problem you're presenting is significant and novel. So why apply for a grant? That is the first question, right? Because it will help you to advance the scientific knowledge in your field and advance your professional career as well. And grant means that experts in the field, they acknowledge your idea as important and worthy of public or private support. That's why I always say that grant is more important than the publication. So once you are able to secure the grant, that talks about the kind of work which you are doing, whether it is of real importance to the community as a whole or not. Okay, so a grant means an enhanced prestige to your institute as well. Grant means contribution to the financial health of your department, because there is overhead component as well, by which institute also gets some funding to upgrade the infrastructure as well. A grant means new opportunities for your research assistant. You can hire more manpower. You can support the research of your ongoing students in the lab. A grant means new program that otherwise can be too expensive for your institute to support and implement. So definitely institutes are there, where you're working. They can support, some of your research work. But if you really want to, build that work further, you need to apply for your own funding. So in India, mostly we are in, if it is a government setup, we are in permanent position. But if you go to US or other countries, there they have a system of tenure track. So what is tenure track system? There, before you get tenure track position, you are on contractual position for a few years. You have to secure your own funding from the funding agencies, and you have to support your research scholars from your own funding. Also, institute will also be funded from your grant, and you also have to support your own salary if you are doing pure research, not involved in teaching. So you can just imagine, everything depends upon your own funding. So if you don't have a grant, you lose your job there. It's very straightforward. So this is not the case here, at least, even if you're not able to secure the funding, your job is going on. But yes, if you really want to contribute, if you really want to do some good research, you have to apply for more and more funding, and you should know how to, write it. So I will just skip few of the slides because of the lack of time. I think we just have 10 minutes left for this presentation. So, but if any one of you is more interested, you can get back to me anytime. So funding, chances of funding is always equal to your interest, what you're pursuing, and the interest of the funding agency. Funding agencies are not going to fund something, which is not their area of priority. If I talk about the ISRO is, International Space Research Organization. They will always support the kind of projects which will align with their research interest. Space research, right? If you're submitting something which is related to, agriculture, or which is something related to defense, they might not be interested in those projects. So you need to identify what is your area of interest. At the same time, what are your strengths? So whenever you are doing research, I always suggest that build your CV in a manner that you should be known for something in like next 5 years or 10 years. Build your, value, brand value in that particular area, so that you should be known for something after some time. So that when you submit your grant funding, people know that, oh, this particular person is working in this area from past so many years. If you're working on 10 different fields, when your application goes for funding, reviewer will see that, this person is working on like everything, doesn't have a specific area of interest or expertise. So the chances of funding gets decreased. So first master yourself in particular area of research, and then, apply for the funding in that particular area. So sometimes, no matter how good your idea is, how well written your proposal is, the agencies sometimes, when you apply for the funding, you may not be funded at first time. So you have to keep the patience, you have to keep on applying again and again. So these are the different funding organizations in India: DBT, DST, SERB, ICMR, ISRO, state government, and BIRAC, by DBT, DRDO, CSIR, Ayush. So there are different funding agencies, which fund different kind of projects. You can approach them, you can go to their web pages, their grant calls, whenever they are open. Apart from that, there are private organizations as well, more than 700,000, can you imagine? Plus other US foundations, like Bill Gates Foundation, I would say. Like that, there are many other foundations who fund the international grant research program. So don't have only, your country, who is supporting you for funding. You can also approach for the international funding agencies. You need to find out who are those agencies and what kind of your work you are doing, and whether they can support that kind of work or not. Apart from that, philanthropic funding as well, right? That also you can find out and approach them, to fund your research. CSR funding, which is also known as the corporate social responsibility. So as per government mandate, every private organizations, industry, they have to have some component dedicated for the corporate social responsibility funding. So you need to tap down these kind of, opportunities, contact the people and ask for funding. So you don't have to rely only on the government, source of funding. You can always go for the private sources of funding as well. Apart from that, there are, other sources of funding as well. You can go to industries like large corporations, like if I talk about the pharma, there are different funding agencies, who are in the need of, some preliminary data on their molecules. So we also receive so many requests from different pharma companies, from different parts of the country, where they want us to do some consultancy project. They have some molecules. They want to see whether this molecule has some toxicity or not, whether it has some therapeutic efficacy or not. So you have that kind of, so once your lab is set up, when once you have a name in a particular field, the companies will come to you, and sometimes you can also approach them to fund your lab, or you can tell them what you can offer them in terms of your capabilities, your lab capabilities. Okay. So this is one of the example, like the recent consultancy project we have received from one of the pharmaceutical company, where they want us to do one of the study on their product, which is on methyl cobalamin new formulation, and they want us to compare this formulation with the existing formulation in the market. So you have a lot of opportunities. You just have to explore around, talk to the people, go to them, write to them. So whenever you are writing the grant application, you need to understand what are your strength, what are the strength, of like in terms of your proposal, and then you also need to look at the weaknesses, like poor branding, no community involvement, minimal fundraising efforts, lack of accountability. That is a very important issue. If if you are doing some consultancy project, and if you're not delivering that project in a definite period of time, you are not going to receive any other consultancy project from that company, and maybe from other companies as well. But if you work sincerely, if you deliver on time, then you build a brand value for your lab, and you keep on getting more and more funding from the organizations. Opportunities, high reach, media support. Then you also need to see, who are your competitors. Sometimes, like change in technology. So you have to adapt the most, advanced changes also which are happening. You need to upgrade your lab facilities as well according to that. So what are the types of projects that receive funding? Sometimes the projects of high scientific caliber. These are the most projects which have most, like chances of getting the funding, and sometimes investigator initiated research as well. So for that, you have to approach the funding agency, tell them this is the area of research you're working on, and whether you can do this kind of research or not. Okay. By law, funding agency cannot support a project which is already funded or pay for research that has already been done. So that comes under the novelty part of the research grant proposal. So you have to be very, very careful what you are proposing, and what you are proposing is really novel, just like research project you carry out in the lab. Then only the funding agency will take interest in your project and will fund it. These are the different government schemes, as I mentioned. Like, you can go to their web page. You will find many, many opportunities. I will not spend much time on this. Then competition. The funding agencies receives thousands of application, in each and every cycle of the funding call. So why do you think that they should, support your application for funding? How it is unique, how it is different from, other, that is something which will make a big difference. That's why funding on the first attempt is really difficult, but not impossible. Even the best idea will not be funded unless it matches the interest of the funding agency. And the competitive ideas must reflect both contemporary thought in the field and the interest of the funding agency. So that you really need to figure out. And sometimes funding agencies, they lost their specific call in that particular area. Like leishmaniasis is an area, where ICMR, launched a specific call, sometime in a year. So you can go for those kind of funding as well if you're working in that area. It needs a lot of planning. You need to understand about your institution, what are their policies, what are the procedures, what are the overhead component, your institute generally asks for, what are the criteria of the funding agency. Sometimes they have fixed criteria that we cannot give more than 10% of overhead. The institute might be asking 20% of overhead, right? So you need to attach the letter from the funding agency and tell your institute that this funding agency cannot give a overhead of more than 10%. So that comes under the budget preparation part. And you need to be careful. You need to be very, very careful while proposing the budget. So the budget, if you're asking like 2 crores and your research problem, is not of that caliber, and or the deliverables are not that, require that much fund, that kind of proposal is never going to be funded. So I would suggest in the initial career, in the early days of your, I would say academic career, propose a moderate budget of like 40 to 50 lakhs. That kind of budget, if your research problem, if you have project is really good. Okay, so those kind of projects are having more chances to get funded. If your proposal has involved the animal studies or the human subjects, plan ahead and make sure that you have the approval from the ethical committee, human ethical committee or the animal ethical committee. Those kind of approval you should have, or you can get a letter from the ethical committee that this proposal is under consideration, and will get the ethical committee approval if the project is funded by the funding agency. Now you have to search for the grant. There are different sources. You google it, or you search national funding agency, and you also search for the international funding agency. But you need to see, go to the details, read their guidelines, what kind of research they are funding. If your homework is weak, it is highly unlikely that you are going to click that grant. So before you submit any grant to any funding agency, you really need to do a lot of homework. Read thoroughly what they ask, what they need, what are their expectations, and then prepare your grant accordingly and then submit it. Writing a grant, right? Be prepared to write and rewrite. It takes time. So you cannot write a grant in 1 week or 2 week or 1 month. It people who really write the good grant, they plan writing the grant at least 6 months ahead of the funding call. They know that this particular call is going to come in this particular month of the year, so they start writing their grant proposal at least 6 months ahead. Then only you can write something concrete, which is fundable. A well written proposal should be very clear, focused, and precise. Okay. Then these are some of the tips for the effective grant writing. You always need to follow an outline, make an outline, make the figures, tables, images before you write your proposal. Think about it many times, pen down with the paper and pen before you work on the word file. Write down your hypothesis. Make sure that it is novel, how it will add difference. Be accurate, be clear, consistent, and use the words accurately. Use sentences of 70 to 23 words. I always tell my students when they write their manuscript, don't use the sentences which are, like more than 3 lines. Otherwise, the sentence will lose its meaning. It will become more complicated to understand, and the message will be lost. So don't write sentences which are too short or too long. Okay. Start paragraphs with clear, informative topic sentences. Think about the style, and know when to avoid the highly technical language, because your grant is not necessarily reviewed by the person who is working in your field. I might be working in the field of pain neurobiology, but the reviewer who might be reviewing my grant may be working in the field of diabetes. So sometimes I have to be careful what words, what sentence I'm using. So sometimes layman language is very much preferred. So avoid too much writing too much technical words in your proposal, unless and until it is really required. So it must be hypothesis driven. So what is your hypothesis? Without hypothesis, none of the research project is valid. Similarly, none of the research proposal stands anywhere if your hypothesis is not clear, if the hypothesis is not novel, right? It must be concise, it must be focused. Also, it should be supported by the preliminary data. Most of the people, do this mistake. They submit their grant proposal, but they don't have the preliminary data. I'm not saying that you should always have a preliminary data, but yes, having the preliminary data in your grant proposal increases the chances of your funding by at least 10 to 20%. Okay. Then if we talk about the hypothesis, it has to be very, very specific and focused. I will not go into these details, but it has to be very, very focused, what you really want to do and achieve and why and how it is novel. And, yeah. So when we talk about the components of the grant proposal, there's something which is very, very important. The specific aims of your grant proposal, should be around half a page, and it should concisely define what you intend to do and why. And then write down each objective and sub-objective, like aim 1, aim 1A, 1B, then aim 2, aim 2A, 2B, and they look like connected to each other. Okay. It should not look like jumping from like aim 1 to aim 3 or then aim 2, right? In a flow, rational. How you will, what are the questions you want to ask, how these questions are novel, and how you will answer those questions. And then comes the background and the significance, which can be around 1 or 1.5 page, in which you can take the support of the published information and can support your hypothesis why you have written this particular project. It will bring the importance to your proposal based on the published literature in that particular area. Then comes the preliminary data. As I mentioned, it always strengthens the chances of your funding. And then comes the experimental plan. It can be around 2 page of section that allows the reviewers to understand how you will actually plan to attack the questions which you have asked in the beginning. Sometimes the questions which you're asking are very good, very strong, right? But you don't have specific tools, you don't have specific methodology, and you don't know how to answer those questions. So your experimental plan will talk about whether you have a clear-cut idea about the questions you are asking and how you are addressing those questions, what methodology you will use. Then give enough background about the your project, and then spell out the specific aims of proposal as I mentioned previously. Okay. And then in the background provide a good overview of the field, and then what are the gaps in the knowledge and how you are going to fill those gaps, and this will set up the stage for your whole grant. So background is a very, very important component, right? Preliminary data, as I mentioned, right? This we have already covered. Then what are you really going to do? This is the heart of your grant application, I would say. But many people spend too much time on the background and the preliminary data, and they run out of steam, they run out of time and efforts, that they don't focus much on the what you are going to do actually in your project. And this is what makes your grant application weak and increases the chances of rejection. So you have to be very careful when you are writing this part of a grant application. Okay, so provide the outline for your experimental approach. Restate each specific aim at the beginning of each section. Restate the hypothesis for the specific aim. Provide a rationale for the specific aim. I have reviewed many grants. I'm in the task force for the DBT, SERP, Early Career Grant, and even ICMR. So whenever I'm receiving, many of the grants, they're lacking in many aspects, and that makes the grant proposal less impressive. Doesn't matter how novel is the hypothesis or the research problem is, but when it is not proposed properly, like in terms of rationale for the specific aim, sometimes you just talk about the rationale of the whole project, but when it comes to the specific aims and objective like aim 1, aim 2, aim 3, you need to discuss the rationale for the each and every objective. Provide the detailed plan of the experiment, how we'll achieve that particular objective. You also write what are the expected outcome from that particular objective, and also propose what are the alternate plans, because research is not something which you're expecting. Sometimes your objective which you have proposed may work out or may not work out, right? So based on your findings, you need to propose the alternative plans and approach, by which you can deal with the unexpected outcomes from your experiments. That should also be the part of your grant application. Okay, this is the overall summary what we have discussed so far, because I think I have run out of time already. It's already past 11. So yeah, so this is just one example I have put it here. So this is the recent grant we have received from the Council of Science and Technology UP, where this project has been funded to us for development of a peripherally acting nanoformulation of opioids for the treatment of neuropathic pain. So you can see the title of the grant is very concise, and it is talking very precisely about the outcome what we are trying to achieve. So in this grant we are very clear that we want to develop some formulation which is peripherally acting for the opioid like drug and for the treatment of neuropathic pain. So it has to be clear, concise, your message. Okay, and then in further part, subsequent grant application, you should explain why you want to develop the peripherally acting nanoformulation, not centrally acting opioid. What are the limitations or the issues associated with centrally acting drugs, and what are the different aims and objectives? How you will formulate it? All those aspects are supposed to become, in the later part of your grant application. So I think that is all what I have today for all of you. So I would like to acknowledge, my students, my postdoc supervisor, Professor Srinivasa Raja, who is working as the Director of Pain Research. He recently retired from his clinical and preclinical duties. So he's a Director of Pain Research in John Hopkins University, Baltimore, Maryland, US. I'm thankful to my team of students, PhD students, and the master students who are working very hard, And I'm also thankful to the funding agencies like ICMR, SERB, MHRD, IIT BHU, International Association for the Study of Pain, International Brain Research Organizations, who are funding our research from past several years since we moved back to India. So yeah. So I would like to end my presentation with a quote that anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. So the age doesn't matter, right? The thing which matters is that whether you are continuously learning the new things or not. So learning will always keep you young. It should never end. And this is the beautiful ghat in Varanasi. If some of you are visiting Varanasi sometime, drop a email to us, visit the lab, visit the department, and we would be very happy to talk to you. Thank you. Sorry if I've taken more time.
Sir, can we go for some questions?
Yes, of course. Please, please. There should be
Dr. Amrit Singh Rajput is want to ask how to improve resolution of figure and improve language of manuscript.
how to improve the figures and
And improve language of manuscript.
okay, very good. That's a very important question, actually. And whenever you are writing maybe research manuscript or writing a grant application, you need to make sure that the figure quality should be really very, very good. So, as I mentioned in one of my slide that whenever you are preparing figures for your publication, you should make sure that the font on the x-axis, y-axis, they are supposed to be very, very clear. And personally, I using PowerPoint. So once I prepare my figures on Excel, or you can use some specific, I would say, like softwares. There are certain tools like Prism is one software. Where you can do the statistical analysis and can also prepare the figures. So it has certain advantages in terms of giving you more I would say options to prepare a figure in different pattern. And then when you're putting in PowerPoint presentation, you have more option to to write down like different titles, subtitles, and you can increase the font, decrease the font, or improve the quality. So that is one way. And always make sure that you don't compress your image, because otherwise journal will ask you again to provide the high quality, high resolution image. If I talk about the language, make sure that I understand that we are not the native English speaker. Our native language may be something else, but whenever you are writing your manuscript, identify the students in your lab, who are good in writing. Some student may be good in doing the experiments, some might be good in writing, so you need to identify those people, and then seek their help when you're writing the manuscript. And then finally you review those manuscripts yourself, and if it is still required, use some softwares. I would say there are a lot of softwares these days, like Grammarly can help you to identify the grammatical errors or typographical errors in your manuscript. Another important point which I forget to mention in my presentation is checking the plagiarism component or the similarity index, right? There are several tools which are available these days, like Turnitin is there. There are other kind of softwares are there, so your similarity index should not be more than 10% or 15%. So that also you need to take care of. Otherwise, journal may not consider your work for publication. So take the professional help if you want the help in the language editing. So many people do that as well these days. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, sir. Sir, next question is from Kaveri. She want to ask that she had applied for Ayush in 2022
Yes,
November and still
yes,
no
I
response. Yes.
the Kaveri, this kind of problems, most of us, face during, our, like whenever we are writing grant and submitting to funding agency. Some of the funding agencies are, really slow, I would say, because of many reasons. I won't comment on, but yes, they are slow. So one thing, is that you should always try to contact the program officer, the scientist in charge, who is dealing with that particular grant. So try to identify, because whenever the grant call is open, that particular call is always dedicated to some scientist in charge, so their name and email ID is always there. If it is not there, try to figure out it from their web page, or directly write to them and mention the grant title when you submitted it, or your application number, and write an email to them. Put a reminders. If you don't hear back from them, put the reminders. if still you don't hear back from them, you should not hesitate to contact their director as well sometime, so there are chances that they may respond to your emails. You can even try to contact them on phone, that is also suggested. You can try to contact. Sometimes they may be hesitant, replying to email, but they will tell you the actual situation, on the phone.
Okay, sir, one more question. Whether
Yeah.
publication criteria on topic for grant proposal is considered for funding?
Very very important question, Dr. Rajput. So yes, so publication criteria is definitely very very important, because when I receive the different proposals to review from ICMR, DBT, or SERP, or other reviewers, not only me, other reviewers, they always uh, look at your publication track record. For example, you are submitting one grant on Alzheimer, but if your track record is on cancer, so the question which we ask, that this person does not have the expertise or the track record in the field of Alzheimer, is working in the field of diabetes. So how he is going to, work on this project? Because the grant call is on Alzheimer. That's why we feel that this particular person has put this grant proposal. So this is I conveyed during my talk as well, that always prepare your CV, or strengthen your CV in a particular area, particular field, for example neuroscience, and then be focused while applying for the grant. You should not apply non-specifically. I never do that. So there are many funding calls throughout the year, like, but you should always apply in an area where your CV, is more strong, I would say. So build your CV in that particular direction, and publication track record is definitely, important. Yes. Any other questions?
Okay. No, sir. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Vinod Tiwari. Thank you for explaining few points very efficiently, like what is strong manuscript, selection of best journal, structuring of article. You also nicely explain while writing abstract, follow the rule of 10. Also, you explain all the details of manuscript, including introduction, results, visualization of results, discussion, conclusion. You also emphasize on acknowledgement, and you have not skipped the cover letter also. The session will be surely very beneficial to all the delegates and refreshers. And he also explained about how to write the grant proposal, and you also elaborated on different funding agencies and tips for grant writing and components of grant proposal. Thank you very much, sir.
It's my pleasure.
On,
Thank you so
on
much.
behalf of our college, it's my kind request to accept the certificate of appreciation.
Thank you so much. I
Thank you,
really
sir.
appreciate the invitation and providing this opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. May
With
I leave
this,
the
I
session
declare,
now? Yeah.
yes, sir, the session is over. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you so much.
The session one is completed.